Prospect Place was built in 1856 by George Willison Adams, my great-great-grandfather. George Willison Adams, being the youngest boy, he and his brother inherited their parents' farm after their death. They sold the farm and built a mill at Adams Mills, about 4 miles from Dresden, where they became fabulously wealthy. It was the only flour mill in that area. The reason his father had left Virginia was slavery. His father had an attack of conscience about slavery after the Revolutionary War, in which he fought, believing that all men were created equal. He decided to move away from the slaveholding South, and those virtues were instilled in young George Willison and Edward Adams. So they became active in the Underground Railroad. They used the mill for that purpose as a safe house for some time, and eventually George decided to become a politician, hopefully influence other politicians in Ohio to be more anti-slavery. That didn't succeed, so he returned to Muskingum County, where he became an even more avid Underground Railroad conductor. The Fugitive Slave Law was passed in 1850, which provided severe penalties for anyone caught harboring escaped slaves. At that point, Edward decided that he didn't want to risk their milling operation and their income, so George decided that he would take the entire responsibility for this to himself, that he would build a new house, and it would be designed from the beginning as a station on the Underground Railroad. That it would be called Prospect Place. It would be a 29-room mansion, brick mansion. His wife, Clarissa, was pregnant with another child, so expanding into a larger house made sense as well for that reason. Yet, sadly, by the end of the year, Clarissa gave birth. When complications of childbirth, she lost her life, and a few months later the baby died. By 1853, he had recovered and met a Mary Jane Robinson from Zanesville. They married, and they moved into the old 18-room farmhouse, and George did not feel comfortable there. Everywhere he looked reminded him of his first wife, Clarissa. So he decided to go ahead with the mansion project, and between the year 1855 and the year 1857, Prospect Place was completed twice. First time around, the building was completed in 1856 and was arsoned, burned to the ground, supposedly by a bricklayer on the project, George Blackburn. George Adams rebuilt Prospect Place. By summer of 1857, it was complete. They moved in and operated the Underground Railroad operation here until the end of the Civil War in 1865. After the war, to become more involved, he wanted to own his own railway, so he found the Cincinnati and Muskingum Valley, which had gone into receivership 5 times, and was happy in that capacity as a railroad mogul until his death on August 31st, 1879. Upon his death, his estate was divided among his children and his wife. The wife received half the estate, which was valued in total at $14 million. The children each received $1 million. The eldest child was Anna Adams, and she received $1 million, the Prospect Place mansion, and 275 acres of land directly attached to the mansion. She married in 1883 a young man named William Evans Cox, and he took over the railroad operations and became the master of Prospect Place. He did a renovation on the building in 1886. By 1900, the family's fortunes were in tatters, the family that remained here. And Mr. Cox boarded a train for Columbus, checked into a hotel, checked out the following day, and was never officially seen again, although there was an account a year later from a young lady in Dresden visiting San Francisco, California, that she saw him there, chased him through a cigar store where he lost her, and that was the last unofficial sighting of William Cox. A number of years before his actual death, Anna had him declared dead. They probated his estate, and his debts outweighed his fortune, so Prospect Place was to be put up to sheriff's auction. And Anna was able to borrow enough money from her wealthy relatives to buy the house back at the auction, so she did not have to move. But her fortunes continued to decline until 1926, when she slipped on the ice at a neighboring home, fell, broke her hip, was returned to Prospect Place, and died at Prospect Place from pneumonia as a complication. The Longaberger Company, under Dave Longaberger, who was distantly related to the Adamses through the Wilcox family, decided to buy the house and save it. We credit him with saving Prospect Place because he installed a new roof on it in 1990. Did a lot of demolition and stabilization work, put security on the building. But he did not get back to this building before he died in 1999. He developed cancer and passed away. We had intentions of making it a bed and breakfast and a restaurant. At the time, the tourist economy was booming here. And we signed on the property September 10th, 2001, the day before the 9/11 tragedy. We continued with our own money to make the building as stable and attractive as possible. We put all the windows back in it, did some of the rehabilitation work, installed a septic system, water system, electrical, and so forth, hoping to encourage another investor. In 2003, Dr. Spector was diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So knowing that I personally would not have the wherewithal to continue the project alone, we established G.W. Adams Educational Center, became a 501c3 in 2006. One of the most important fundraising activities we do is ghost hunting. The house has a certain haunted history as well.
They had been moved up towards me.
I saw a green glowing ball about that size light up and then go into the wall and disappear.
A door on the second floor slammed shut.
I've had some experiences myself, and I've heard a lot of other people tell me their stories, things that have happened here. When I was in Mary's bedroom on a ghost hunt one night, there were two other women in the room, and I was sitting facing the closet, and a group came out of the servants' quarters, and I saw a green glowing ball about that size light up and then go into the wall and disappear. And I looked in the closet here. There was a green glowing ball of light that started about here and went into the wall and disappeared. Nobody in the hallway had a flashlight with a green light. I happened to have a finger light with a green light, and I tried shining the light through the crack here to see if I could get a small beam of light. It lit up the whole closet. I could not duplicate a small glowing ball of light, no matter what I did. Another time I came through with a tour, and a couple of people had been here before, and they said when they came through on the tour, one of them just went over and rattled the doorknob because they kept feeling like there's somebody in there. And when they turned to walk away, the doorknob rattled again. And this would have been Mary Adams' bedroom. One of these rooms was her closet and one was the dressing room. So it could have been Mary Adams.
I first came to Prospect Place to see a Civil War reenactment, and I decided to stay around for the evening to do a ghost hunt. And that's what kind of got me involved with coming back a couple more times to experience things. And that night, we were using what's called dowsing rods, divining rods, whatever you want to call them. And got a lot of interesting activity from that. And this spot right here in the ballroom is one of the spots where there was a lot of activity with those dowsing rods. I made them about 1.5 feet long, sat myself down, and began to ask questions. And it wasn't too long until the tips of the rods started touching. I went on to talk a little bit more, and pretty soon the rods that were angling down were pushed up to where they were about like this. Something was pushing those rods up towards me. I can't explain, I can't say it was a ghost. What it was, I'm not sure. I'm not giving any names, any ghosts or anything like that. I've never heard disembodied voices, I've never seen apparitions, but I've also only been coming here for about a handful of times. And the maybe 3 or 4 times that I've come here on a ghost hunt, I've left scratching my head about some things that were pretty curious. This was one of those spots right here.
One night, I had a couple from up north there came down, did an investigation. They left at about 4 o'clock, and when they left, I locked all the doors, windows are shut. I go upstairs to grab the CD player that was in the ballroom that they had used. When I went up to get the CD player, a door on the second floor slammed shut, and it was a pretty hard slam. First thing I thought of was that somebody was in the house, an intruder. So I go through the house, check the whole house over, everything's still locked, and nobody in the house. So it was kind of weird.
A lot of people see the figure of a young girl inside or outside the door on the second floor. She's the most well-known local legend for this place. The story goes that she was sick and she went out on the balcony and she fell to her death. It was wintertime, the ground was frozen, so they couldn't bury her body at the time. So they wrapped her body in cloths and they stored it in the basement until spring came and the ground could thaw and she could be buried. And supposedly the mother would go down in the basement and sit with her daughter every day until she was buried. There used to be a portico out here, and the roof of that formed the balcony. A former tour guide believed it was Constance that fell to her death. She was the adopted daughter of George's daughter Anna, who inherited the house. But she died in September. She died of consumption, so the ground would not have been frozen, so it wouldn't have been her. But a lot of people claim to see a girl here, and one group has gotten a picture of a girl outside the door looking in, and there's no longer a balcony out there. So if there was a face looking in, it's somebody that's no longer living.
Another experience that I had was when I was in the basement. Again, I was house sitting that night, and I was down there taking pictures, lights were off, and something grabbed my Carhartt jacket on the right side, tugged on it 3 times. Again, nobody else was in the house, nobody in the basement.
After that session, just the floor below us in the ballroom, I came up here with my dowsing rods, and just to see if that same occurrence would happen up here. And I started talking about the parties that happened downstairs and that kind of thing, appeasing, talking about wine and stuff like that, just party stuff, you know. And pretty soon, those dowsing rods that I had angled, you can see it there like this, you have to angle them like this. They were moved, they had been moved up towards me. And it didn't take but 10 minutes for that to happen. And that it made me absolutely fascinated about coming back and doing a little bit more. It's like talking to someone about what they're into. Like say, the people downstairs, they were party goers, you know, ballroom party. You know, did you drink and flirt with the ladies while you were having a time of your life up here for that evening? You know, that kind of thing. You need to try to connect with, because they were people. And that seems to be what responds. If you can connect with someone from a certain time period, you have to really use your imagination to figure out what they were into at the time.
One time before I started actively working here, I was waiting on George in the main hallway. I heard footsteps come in the door on the far end, and I thought they were going around the opposite way through the dining room, and his dog was in the basement at the time, and he heard the footsteps because the dog was gone nuts, but nobody ever came out. Another time I was in the basement alone, and it was daytime, and I would clean, and if somebody came, I would stop cleaning and I would do a tour. And Felix lived here at the time, and he was gone for the day, and George went to the hardware store. So I'm down there by myself, and I hear a woman walking through the kitchen. So I figured somebody came in wanting a tour, and I come up the stairs, and there's no one there. And George had just pulled up outside and was just opening the car door. There was nobody else in this mansion at the time, and you could very clearly hear the footsteps.
There's another experience in the barn on the 3rd floor. There was 4 of us up there that night, nobody else here. We were up there taking pictures and everything, and something walks up to the 2nd floor landing. Then we'd walk back down. It'd walk back up, then walk back down. And on that last time it walked back up, I asked another guy to shine his flashlight down on the 2nd floor landing. And when he shined his light down there, it just sounded like the whole barn was being ripped apart. A lot of stuff happens here. You just gotta give it time. I like to do everything by myself. I like to investigate by myself.
There's a legend of the bounty hunter out in the barn. We know for a fact at one point bounty hunters did show up here looking for runaway slaves and were run off. The local legend is that the farm hands would go after them, bring them back to the barn, have an impromptu trial, and string them up on the 3rd floor of the barn. And a lot of people think one of them's still here. We call him the bounty hunter. He's not a very nice person. He likes to attack women. A lot of groups come in here and they think they have to provoke the spirits, and if they provoke and there's a woman in the group, he will make the woman violently ill, and she will feel violently ill until she gets out of the barn, and then she's fine. We've also had one of the former board members doing a ghost hunt or tour, and she was on the steps and the steps started shaking, and she was the only one that noticed anything. It wasn't happening above or below, it was just the steps that she was on.
I got a picture of what looks like to be a woman sitting at the bottom of the stairs in the basement.
I heard what sounded like footsteps.
A lot of those people didn't survive. You can tell by the chairs behind me, this is where a lot of activity takes place in the mansion. And the 2 rooms off to the sides are where the runaway slaves would stay. And back in those days, they would have had shutters on the windows so nobody could see in. And they had the fireplaces to keep them warm. And they could house a lot of slaves in these 2 rooms. So part of the activity could have been because not all of the runaway slaves that passed through were in good health, and some of them didn't make it. Another reason there could have been a lot of activity is at one point there was a train crash near Ellis Dam, and some of the survivors were brought here to await help, and when the 2 trains collided, they were steam engines and the boiler exploded. And a lot of people were severely burned. And you got to remember, back in those days, it took a long time to get a fire going, build up the steam, to get a train to move, and it took some time for the train to come from Coshocton. And a lot of those people didn't survive. There's one ghost supposed to be in the basement named Charlie, who only comes out if it's pitch black, because he was burned in the fire and considers himself disfigured and doesn't want anyone to see his face.
I've got several good pictures. I got a picture of what looks like to be a woman sitting at the bottom of the stairs in the basement. I've got a picture of what we call the shadow person, shadow man. Got a picture of what looks like fire from the above the servants' quarters outside and through a window, and it looks like it's actually coming through into the ballroom. And as you know, the first house here burnt to the ground. I have this picture of this little girl, what looks like to be a little girl, coming through the ballroom door. I took it back in 2003. It's about 11:30 at night. It was in October. Actually, I got a couple pictures of little girls coming through the ballroom door, and a picture of a little boy also in the ballroom.
I came up here one day to do some painting. I'm an artist, and I decided to paint the barn for that day. I got right up close to it, started painting away. You know, that happened. That went on for about 15 minutes. Everything was fine. All of a sudden, boom! Came from inside the barn. Sounded like it was from the upper floors. Sounded like something falling on wood floor. I can't say what happened there. There was a time where that same day I started painting another view of the barn. I heard what sounded like footsteps. I mean, something rustling behind the door. George had gone to an auto parts store that day. I was the only one here. You know, just me and my paints and my canvas. And I sat on those steps and I listened to this noise that was going on behind me. I tried to look through the window of the door and I could not see anything.
When I first started working here, the daytime tours, George had a very large Rottweiler named Rocky. Scared the crap out of me. He was enormous. And he had him chained in the doorway of the barn. He would come out to the end of his chain about here and stick his nose in the air and start licking, almost like someone was standing there feeding him something. And I saw him do this on numerous occasions. And I thought, something must be out there. And one time, I went and got a disposable camera to take a picture and see if I could catch anything. And the camera wouldn't work, of course. But I've never seen any other dog act like that.
There were two groups of us down there, my sister and I and a couple of her friends, and we ran into another group of about 5 or 4 people down there. And they had dowsing rods also, so we sat in a circle, far end of the cellar, and we know they had their dowsing rods, we had ours, and we thought it'd be like a some kind of joint effort, you know. And we sat there. It wasn't until I actually started provoking, nothing was going on for about 20 half hour. We still sat there. We were desperate for something to happen down there. So, saying those things, we did start getting activity. They weren't as strong as what happened in the ballroom and the servants' quarters, but they did meet about halfway. And showing respect to whatever might be there, I decided to get up and go back upstairs.
When I would do the ghost hunts, I would spend the whole night here, so I wasn't driving home in the dark. And one night, myself and another board member were staying in here. It was between 5 and 6 in the morning. There was a couch over here, which I was laying on. She was laying in a bed over here, and she was sleeping, and I thought it was thunder outside that I kept hearing. And there were 2 women staying in the room above us, and they were walking back and forth, and they were walking so hard the light was shaking. And I could hear the door slamming open and shut. And the other board member woke up and she said, "What's that noise?" And I said, "It's thunder." And she got up and she said, "That's not thunder." And when she got up, she checked. It wasn't storming outside. And I said, "Well, I just figured it was the ones upstairs walking back and forth." And she went up in the hallway. She said, "There's absolutely no movement going on up there. They must be asleep."
I'm not a strong ghost hunter. I don't have any fancy equipment. I just rig these things up for a day, and that night I left here scratching my head.